Thank you for everybody for organizing, for my supervisors. And I'm going to share my screen. If there's technical difficulties, I hope we can avoid that. I just want to say thank you everyone for coming, the new intakes, the alumni, and also the professors. I really hope you will enjoy this presentation. Okay, we can start. So as we envision today's UCLA IS Colloquium panel as a digital potluck, being a 3-course meal, of course, it's my absolute privilege to kickstart this knowledge sharing session with an entree appetizer. It's going to be light, but with enough substance to make you craving for even more. So here I'm representing Erasmus Mundus Joint Master's Degree Program, as Leah mentioned, and it's a digital communication leadership program, and specifically in technology management track. And through that, I will present my current thesis status on the ethical AI in the European context. When I talk about how ethics and morality are intertwined together with artificial intelligence, machine learning and deep learning models, many recent stories pop into our minds, for sure. But we don't need to look into this fictitious world of Skynet of the 90s or video games of 2000s, because we are already living in a reality where this emerging technology affects significant aspects of our lives. Not only that, but the changes are so rapid, which requires timely but effective oversight and legislative initiatives. And I have 2 examples here you can see on my slides. One is the moral machine devised by the MIT Media Lab, very popular one. It takes a thought experiment of a trolley problem and then questions utilitarianism in a setting where we have some additional layers. For example, which degrees of autonomy formally exist when it comes to self-driving cars? Are there any casualties that for which are responsible the driver or also the author of the algorithm? And moreover, how is the choice itself automated? On basis of what data? The second example is more recent. Many people have heard about it. It's Google's dismissal of its 2 leading researchers in ethical AI. One is Timnit Gebru, and soon after it happened to Margaret Mitchell. This decision came soon after a culmination over a conflict of a paper which tackled a massive data set and inscrutable models. Specifically, not getting into details, it was about environmental impact, the financial investment in the pre-training and generating metadata, also indiscriminately choosing the sources of data. And all these things kind of boiled the pot, and it happened what happened. And many people have been discussing, can it be amended? Just going further on now for my thesis, since I wanted to focus on Europe and their AI strategy, it was necessary to investigate what EU institutions in particular and the bodies they are associated to have prepared so far. In principle, whoever is not familiar with the EU, there's a commission that proposes new laws and the Parliament and Council adopt them. And since the AI regulation is fairly new, most of the discussions are happening on a commission level. In such a sense, there's a quote here that we can see that AI has become an area of strategic importance, but not only because of this tech aspect, we have a socioeconomic, legal, and ethical impacts, and EU really much likes to tackle that as well. And there's another reason why Europe is a great case study for AI regulation, because if you look at the track record of innovation, we can see some patterns. For example, we know that EU lost the internet to the US. We know we lost manufacturing to China, but the strength of EU was always in creating unified frameworks and standards in the spheres of concerning the digital data. In this sense, we can see that the GSM in the 1990s and the GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation from 2010s, are widespread around the world as standards. And I think we can see the pattern that maybe EU wants to force itself to become a leader in regulating AI. And then we can see what has been published so far. So everything is relatively new. Only since 2018, EU has prepared 3 major documents, and there's a newest one that came just last month. So we have a total of 4. The most prominent one is definitely the high-level expert group on AI, published in 2019, because this particular document defines certain outcomes in the form of ethical principles, the key requirements and assessment list as well, but ethical principles being the most important. And these principles are used extensively as a basis for my research. And having introduced the EU documents in the last slide, and together with my theoretical background, where there's many papers written by Luciano Floridi, data-driven policymaking and AI literacy, my tentative research question is formed as such, as you can see in this slide, is how the main ethical principles, mainly the three main ones, explainability, autonomy, and bias, can be contextualized and visualized in order to provide better decision processes for AI policymakers. The explainability goes into how we can do the explain the internal mechanics to non-experts. The autonomy is more about the degree of human oversight, and the bias explains the degree of fairness of the result. And I think all 3 of them are very important, and they're mostly discussed in these documents. And there's important to distinguish just the definitions of these words, because sometimes they get fairly philosophical as well. And then going through these 3 ethical AI principles, the explainability tries to demystify the black box of AI based on the inputs and the outputs. And then I was searching for a visualization method that kind of works best for this. And I came to using the graphs and especially PERT charts. The PERT charts are used as a project management tool when we have complex processes. And for example, here is something everybody who works as a data scientist knows, and who uses machine learning models. Here you can see a very simplified way of saying, okay, you're using the neural network, but which one is it? Which structure and which cell function are you using? Because the difference makes, are you using it to predict a time series or generate a synthetic image pattern, for example? You can see it's a colorful neural network zoo in a sense of a way, and I want to take the similar approach and tailor it for policymakers in order to just demystify the most basic of the methods that are being used in the life of a policymaker. When it comes to the autonomy level, I here refer to Article 14 of the Artificial Intelligence Act, the newest document that dropped out. And there we can see that Parliament decided to go with a traffic light system, similar to COVID-19. So we have different degrees of a risk that are based on autonomy levels. And I realized once I clean the data, I can use this in 3D space across different domains. And I can use both autonomy scores, macroeconomic factors, and some other, like for example, geographical domains. And for example, I hope this works. On the left, you can see the dummy data example that I use as a template. And on the right, you can see the preliminary data I actually used using degree of autonomy, RCA index, and the world share in the sense of GDP. Moreover, I ultimately want to use also different dimensions from the previous example to be accessible in an interactive visualization dashboard for each policymaker. So what I showed previously, I want to also break down into 2D graphs, which policymakers, this is also dummy data, but I am preparing to plug it in with my data I obtained from a previous slide. And therefore, the policymakers are able to go more into detail and get detailed insight. And then we come to the last ethical principle I've chosen for this research, and it's the one of bias or fairness, with many of its different aspects. But this is something that I have most open questions about because of the nature of the data, the GDPR, and depending on how and which data we have obtained, is it open or not? It's just hard to visualize bias it's more like we can just kind of break it down in simpler terms for people. Although I would really like to use real data, it's still very hard to contextualize it. So of course, I want to have discussion in my thesis. Okay, we want to have these aspects because they're really important. But I will try to create a very simple gamified panel, such as you can see here on this slide. It's an example, it's an approach used by Timnit et al. From the paper from this year, actually, and where these concepts are like represented in an abstract manner of geometric shapes and colors. So I feel this is going to be more for me an investigative journalism part of my thesis, because I really have to figure out how to get some of these data, and maybe how some of these companies, how the structure is, who is on the top on the management positions, and how this works. With that, I just want to say any advice from our listeners are more than welcome during the Q&A session. I would really appreciate it. With that, I just want to end my short overview of my thesis. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. And since we don't want our main course to go cold, I will gladly give the floor to our next speaker, Reza. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the introduction, Professor Leah. I'm just going to share my screen now. And I hope you all can see it clearly. So yeah, thank you for the introduction, and good evening, people, good afternoon, and good morning to wherever you are. So I just want to maybe jump in right into the topic, but I'm sure some of you or most of you are very familiar with this sort of cliche example. It's this chatbot developed by Microsoft. It's the Tay chatbot. It was published in Twitter, and the premise was this chatbot would interact live with people through tweets, right? And it would learn from the data that people give. And funnily enough, or maybe I don't know if this is this should be expected or maybe not, but within 24 hours, the chatbot completely grew crazy and became super duper offensive, right? But I want to highlight this statement that Microsoft sort of gave to Business Insider that, you know, this is a system that is designed for human engagement and it learns. So with a system that is able to learn, there is opportunities for it to sort of, there are risks for it to sort of behave in ways that we do not expect, or in unethical ways, or maybe in ways that could harm us, you know? So the question goes to how do we sort of prevent this, right? Well, first, what you could do is you could have a lot of AI ethical principles as outlined by this work by the folks at Harvard. Basically, there's already a lot of AI ethical principles out there. Davor mentioned one that was by the EU. Aside from government, there are also AI ethical principles by companies, by academia, by independent organizations. There are a lot of them. Then comes to the next question. How does that apply to design practice? So there's already some efforts in that, you know, like there's this systematic scan sort of that tries to see all kind of existing tools that may map out to some of these ethical principles. And at first I was super happy with this with this work. But as I later found out, this was more towards an AI or machine learning audience, because at first I was happy to see that, oh, they included a design phase here. So I wanted to go into deeper to how sort of maybe some of the tools that designers can use to, you know, alleviate to prevent the effects of these AI systems. But then when I went into the design phase, there is actually not much there. And some of the examples were a bit arbitrary, like design thinking. So I mean, I don't need to sort of design AI. I'm already using design thinking in a way. And so I was a bit disappointed by that. So it got me to sort of try to think about what about design, you know? Because design has this sort of tradition of always involving people into the process, of always, you know, considering the human values, of considering the ethical considerations. And even right now, there's already a ton of tools out there that people can use to design ethically. And design is also sort of supposedly used to wicked problems, these problems that are not straightforward to solve, problems that are ill-defined or unique or have multi-level complexity to it. So supposedly design is used to that. But my literature sort of says otherwise. Designing AI is still hard. So to sort of expand on this, this is just an oversimplification of what AI is, but AI is basically a system that can learn from data, right? From external data. There's a model that trains it, and then there's an output, whether it's a prediction, whether it's a decision or something else. That's just an oversimplification. Whereas design always focuses on user experience, right? Design sort of tries to view things from this angle where they try to find out what the user needs are, what their problems are, what their mental models are. And then from there, they synthesize and come up with solutions, right? Which is basically the AI system initially. They have a list of maybe features of an AI system that, could potentially solve the user problems. But then, AI needs data sets and models. So then there's an expanding challenge of like, where do we get the data? What kind of data is right for this sort of system? And what kind of model is right? So they need to sort of figure that out, right? But there's also a problem, the user experience that users actually experience is not the AI system that is deployed initially. Most of the time, AI systems would then evolve through the interactions with users as they gain more data, and thus changing the output of the AI system. So then, what you sort of try to figure out at the initial phase of the work would probably evolve over time, right? And from this, a lot of interesting questions have come up in the academia, in the industry of like, how do we actually design for all of this? And it's hard. But my focus is sort of like, with all of that in mind, I basically wonder like, how do designers that are already designing AI consider values and ethical concerns in their design? So basically my mindset to approaching this project was that I wanted to really talk and connect with AI designers that are already designing things, that are already putting things out there. So I did this project through an interview and a workshop. So the interview I've pretty much sort of done, and I'm analyzing the data right now. But basically, I interviewed 8 experienced AI designers and developers to an extent on their experience with AI projects, their processes, the role of design that they see in designing AI, and how do they actually apply these values in practice, So it pretty, I have this I now have this picture from talking to the people that my initial hunch from the literature was more or less right, because a lot of these processes that involve designers are either focusing on the user experiences, or they sort of also try to consider the data sets or the AI system initially, but rarely do people actually take into account when the AI system is actually evolving, thus changing the output, right? So also there's some interesting things to note. Some designers already try to use some ethical methods or toolbox in their processes, but once again, it's too early in the processes. They just maybe use it at the beginning of the process in the conceptualizing phase without taking note when the AI system actually evolves. Some also try to bring these AI principles into practice, but also face some challenges. One quote that I heard from one of my participants that actually I think would stick with me until the end of the project is that they mentioned that when they try to organize workshops with engineers and designers, they actually mentioned that people don't have the time to fix a problem that is not there yet. So this is one of the challenges that maybe practitioners in the field are facing. Also, this leads me to this sort of mindset that maybe there needs to be a new paradigm in design when it comes to designing AI and accounting for the unintended consequences. So my progress right now is I'm going to do workshops. This is just something that I've done over the weekend with some of my designer friends. Basically, I'm going to tell you a bit more about it, but this workshop is, it's a novel suggestion by my supervisor, Yannick. I had a really fun time conducting it with my designer friends. But just to give a rundown, it's called the Nightmare Scenario Workshop. It's kind of interesting. So basically, you gather you gather a room full of designers, right? And then you ask them to imagine what AI is to them and try to define, what kind of values that they think make for a good AI. A good AI that is useful to interact with, a good AI that is beneficial for society. And then the fun part, right? So they would have already a list of values. I would then ask them to, try to violate those values, try to think of ways where an AI system could sort of violate those values and bring up all of these nightmare scenarios, right? So they would generate all of these super bleak nightmare scenarios, and it was fun, like, to hear some of their dark thoughts. And then after that, I would ask them to say, try to think of ways of preventing your nightmares or the others' nightmares to happen and fix. So these would generate like a stream of ideas of how they would then like apply um, apply these preventive measures in their practice, right? And then at the end, I would ask them to sort of reflect on this and try to see whether these measures that they've come up with are actually done in practice or not, or if yes, how and to what extent? If not, why? So yeah, that's basically it. And I've had a really good time like organizing this workshop. Maybe I'm just having too much fun, but that is all from my thesis progress. And I'm actually looking forward to a lot of feedbacks, maybe a lot of interesting questions from the people from the audience here. And thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Let me share my screen first. So yeah, I'm going to be like the closing. I hope you're not full yet. This is going to be the teaser for all of you. So the thesis is called like I read for IE. So in a nutshell, it's about Indonesian women seek information seeking behavior whenever they're looking for healthy eating content on digital platforms. But before starting this presentation, let's start the game. Actually, it's more like a reflection. You don't need to answer, but just think. What did you have last dinner? Next one. What made you think it was healthy or unhealthy? How will you clarify the food is healthy or unhealthy? Sometimes there's always notion good and bad whenever we are talking about food. So like yesterday morning, I had like a coffee and asparagus for dinner. And I found this information when I Google it. I just typed does coffee and does asparagus. While on the coffee, the notion is very positive. It's about, can coffee make you lose weight? Does coffee make you sexually active? I was like, oh wow, what an information. But when I moved to asparagus, it's just talking about pea smell, stinky pea. That's it. Maybe I will not eat asparagus for the next 3 months after having this information. But wow, it makes me think, but does the information seeking process stop there? Maybe yes, but maybe no. But from what I learned, that it is a very iterative process, then always coming back and forth. However, most of the scholars are arguing whether this food is like bad or not. So the notion is like angel and demons here, but they're not really looking about like how these people are looking for information. That's why I'm interested in this research, especially in the context of Indonesia. And there's like women element here. How do they seek healthy eating content on digital platforms? So I think like a few years ago, there was a case in Indonesia. People, some people were dying because they're following a healthy eating practice. Back then it was keto. It was becoming a trend because people want to be healthy, they want to lose weight, but they're losing their life. And especially this keto diet is practiced by the women. And we know, like based on the literature that I've read, there's like a gender digital divide in Indonesia. Why? Because the difference in education and also economy, and especially the most important thing is the patriarchal influence, because Indonesia is a very patriarchal culture here. So this is actually like the big themes happening in my literature. Of course, it's about information seeking and digital platform, online communities, how people are interested inside. But what are more interesting are the gender and mid and low income countries. Most of the narrative of information seeking are happening in the global north, talking about the USA, Europe, but not really in Asia. So somehow it's always customized like up there, but not like in the global south. And also, whenever we're talking about the information seeking, the notion is about media literacy, but what kind of information they are looking. Here is about healthy eating. It's about health related to the health and also food. So it makes like the richest more complicated than ever. There's like media literacy, health literacy, and also food literacy. There are three additional elements here. So for the methodology itself, like this is like in a nutshell. So I have like some connections like about of Indonesian women who are interested about it on the topic as well, and they are referring me to the other people. That's why it's purposive and snowball. And for the preliminary interview, I'm having like open like interview first. Just want to see what's the data like down there in the grassroots level, and then followed by the semi-structure later, and then analyze with the grounded theory approach. So based on this like 7 preliminary interviews, these are like the 3 big themes. Then of course it will like grow along with the interview, but this is what I identify now. There are 3: the information, credibility, and digital platforms. But what are those? We're talking about the information first. It's interesting, and I was surprised to know that most of these Indonesian women are referring to the knowledge in the Western world, like why it must be Western world, especially the America, because it's happening there. In Indonesia, we don't really know what is the notion of healthy eating. Keto diet, mayo diet, salt diet, plant-based, everything is coming from the Western world, but not from like the Asia. And the online information here doesn't mean 100% free. So in this context, it's not about trading your data with information, but to access this information, they really have to pay. So it's not always free, but I will explain this later on the digital platform. And what's interesting is the notion of healthy eating is always related to the mindful living, because for them, like eating is not enough. It's not just about the food, but also what's inside your head. So there are like the 3 big things, like for the healthy eating is a body, mind, and soul. And credibility is divided into 2, the information and the profile. Will focus on the information first, whether it is based on the scientific knowledge or not. Because there are a lot of misinformation happening about healthy eating. I mean, wellness industry is really a big industry in Asia, especially Indonesia. We have more than 200 million population, big market. Of course, people are raising, selling this detox tea, selling this gummy bear. So now, does this information based on the scientific knowledge people really want to know? And also the credibility based on the profile. Does this person is certified, or are we on the same boat? I will explain this on the next slide. So this is example of the 2 people that I interview. The left one is the expert, because you can see she is putting certified holistic nutritionist on her profile. And this made people like, oh, yeah, these people has the knowledge about the healthy eating because she's taking this course, whether it's like a university, she doesn't put it on detail, but this person is certified. And the second one on the right, you can see the hashtag autoimmune, myasthenia gravis. Of course, if you have autoimmune, you prefer to talk with people who have the disease to know like the success story, what's to do and also what not to do as well. And the last stuff is digital platform. So as I mentioned before in the beginning, I thought information seeking process is linear, but no. However, I find information that people are kind of labeling these platforms because of the functions. So whenever something is happening in their body, let's say, oh yeah, I have a split headache, I have a flu, I have a cold, they will usually Google what's happening in my body. I have this kind of symptom. Oh, congratulations, you have cancer. Maybe, but maybe also not. That's why they always like dig something further. But if they want to find like an expert talks, interview, even like recipes about healthy eating, they go to YouTube. The testimonials are there, and also the tutorials, and the quantity of the positive and negative are somehow also influencing them. And also the third one is the Instagram, because we have around like 82 million users, Instagram users in Indonesia. They find like a public online communities, here's recipes, influencers in this context, like these people who have this kind of disease, and also people who is certified in this blah, 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 blah. They found it on this platform. So people can start either from the Google, YouTube, Instagram. But if they want to engage in a deeper discussion, they're going to WhatsApp. So WhatsApp here is not like you're talking with your family, you're talking with a friend, but it's a closed group specifically about healthy living, healthy eating, sustainable living, because it's always intertwined where they can have deeper discussion with like-minded people. But to enter this group is not free. Sometimes they have to pay, even sometimes they have to pay like per course, monthly, or they need to know who is like the head of this group to be recruited, because there are a lot of experts here and most of them are women. So what's next? 13 more interviews. It will make everything is like 20, improving the interview guidelines. And this is the most important part, is like coding. Is always iterative, back and forth. I know it's stressful, but also interesting. I found a lot of stuff. And as a closing, I just want to say, bon appetit.